is the technology has probably come a long ways in the time period from when these barns were built to now we're remodeling. What are some of the newest technologies that you're putting into barns now?
Some of the big ones, so wet dry feeders. A lot of the barns around here were built with just dry feeders with, say, cup waters or nipple waters. And now the big push is wet dry feeders, which is essentially the feeder and the water all in one. That's a big one. Usually when barns are up for like contract renewal, feeders is a big one, and then controls. So in the past, most of the barns around here were put with pretty basic controls. They work. There's nothing really, wrong with inherently how they work. But the biggest thing they've pushed for was more updated, more modernized, more robust controllers that last a little longer.
Ladies and gentlemen, farmers, ranchers, and distinguished guests, thank you for listening to the Farm for Profit podcast, where we discuss the latest ideas, methods, trends, and techniques available to help your farm achieve higher levels of farm profitability. The Farm for Profit podcast is co-hosted by Tanner Winterhoff, the Iowa Bankerman, and David Whitaker, the Iowa Land Guy, where in tandem they will share their ideas and advice from industry experts. Thank you again for listening to the Farm for Profit podcast. Remember, if you aren't farming for profit, you won't be farming for long. And now, here's Tanner and David.
And listeners, welcome back to the Farm for Profit podcast. This is Tanner Winterhoff.
This is Corey Hillebow.
Was that better energy for you? You give me so much.
No.
Welcome back
the same
to the Farm
energy as
for
always.
Profit podcast. Well, sorry, listeners. Didn't mean to let you down. Maybe they don't care as much as you care.
Maybe I just care more than you.
I don't know. We're going to get ourselves into a hole we can't get dug back out of. But listeners, you are joining us on a Farm for Profit episode. We're going to focus on a topic today. We've got an expert in here to keep things moving forward. We have fun every time we record, but our Farm for Fun shows come out on Thursday, which would be the next show in your queue, and just a little bit of different format.
Yep. And as always, we love doing listener reviews, so please go review us. You can text us at 515-207-9640. You can also leave us a voicemail at that number. You can email us at farmforprofitllc@gmail.com, or you can go review us on just Apple and Spotify. Yep. Or just, comment on our TikToks or YouTube, and we'll use it there, too.
We will find you. We'll find your comment everywhere.
Yep.
We appreciate it on all platforms. We also appreciate our sponsors because we know that we couldn't get this done. It's surprising how much goes into a podcast that people don't realize. And Sukup Manufacturing is continuing to be on board with us. We appreciate all the support that they give us. We can talk about their equipment. We can talk about their people. We can talk about how their people innovate their equipment. I just am proud to say that we have been able to partner with them. There's a lot of brands, which you heard during Matt's branding episode, that are top-notch, and I think Sukup is that of the grain handling industry.
Yeah. I tell you what, after this last harvest, it wasn't no 2021 harvest, but it was still pretty dang good. I could use some more storage.
Oh, well, I know who you could call.
There we go.
We can get you hooked up with Sukup. But listeners, this next review came to you from Apple Podcasts, so we thank you. That's where the 5-star ratings really help us out. This was a 5-star rating from Preston Grazer Cave. What? What are you laughing at?
I just read it.
What does this say?
It said, you guys can train anything from bad dogs to stubborn farmers. Laugh out loud. Love this podcast, and you guys keep it up.
So that is like a true listener because he combined like 3 or 4 episodes.
Yeah.
To
the bad dogs, the whole
voicemail from the chamber.
Yeah.
And stubborn farmers. That's
Andy.
That's been a show a long time ago.
Yeah, and Eddie Cajun.
Preston, thanks for listening and leaving us that really cool review. Remember, if you guys have a review to send, that's the way to do it. And now, Legacy Farmer. Jace, let's see what he has to say on his legacy segment today.
Here from Legacy Farmer, bringing you another legacy principle for today, titled Make Deep Cuts Quickly. Today's conversation revolves around one word: avoidance. Here's the truth. Most family farm operations understand that they have problems with their finances, with their business, and with their family, but most are unwilling to face them head on and do what is required in order to solve them. Today's market and environment that we operate in demands action. The market doesn't care about sentimental value in things, people, or your operation. It demands for you as the business owner to adapt and make deep cuts quickly, to do what is required in order to survive and ultimately thrive in this economy. This might involve letting go of ground you farmed for years, an employee, a relationship with a family member, or something else that has been important to your operation. I can promise you one thing. If you are unwilling to make changes and you avoid the reality of the ag economy, it's not a matter of if you will go out of business, but when. That may be harsh, but it's just the truth. If your business is not working right now, you must find out why and be willing to have the courage to make deep cuts quickly. This is exactly what we have seen time and time again with our members in Legacy Farmer. We step into their business with them, find the problems, and lead them through making those deep cuts quickly. Because if we don't, their children or grandchildren may not have an operation to come back to. This is about protecting your family legacy and ensuring that your life's work is not for nothing. So step up, show up, and do what is required to make the deep cuts quickly in your farm operation.
God, he just show up, Corey.
I had so many things running through my head. I think of like death by 1,000 cuts when he said that. And I feel like we're coming to a head here. We were just talking about interest rates this morning, and like we're getting almost used to $140 to fill up our gas tank.
Sure.
You know, $1,000 on a repair bill here, whereas a few years ago we would have flipped over.
Oh, right.
You know, and it kind of scares me.
I went clear back to the very first Farm4Profit conference. We actually were called Ames Ag Summit at that time. We're talking 7 years ago.
Yep.
There was a company and a gentleman. So the company was Ag Solver, and it was Dr. Muth that presented. And he gave out the theory that there were some parts of the field that they wouldn't even plant. They picked a planter up.
Yeah, they're going to put it into CRP.
And drove over it because it was not profitable to farm it. He's talking about letting land go. That's hard. I don't know of any farmer that is excited about saying, nah, we're not going to farm that next year.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. I would also say when I'm thinking about cuts, make them deep cuts quickly, but also use a sharp knife.
That's really good. And I think we've got a sharp knife here in the expert for today's conversation. So let's talk about that. Corey, you and your family have a project that I think you're going to take on here in the next 12 months. But we also have listeners who have written in saying that, one, they're saving up their money to make a purchase in agriculture, or two, they've identified a couple of properties and wanted us to tackle the topic today to see how best practice or best way to approach rehabbing or revitalizing those, Corey. So now that I've teased our listeners a little bit, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about livestock facilities and specifically hog barns and hog barn remodels. And the thing that you talked about that we are looking at doing in the next 12 months is a remodel of our hog barns that are 23 years old.
Yeah.
20 almost 25 years old, actually.
Right. Yeah, we got to get it further.
Oh my gosh, it's time flies.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of concerned with the
Those
way
barns
interest
are
rates.
older than you are.
They are. Almost. I wish.
Right. Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of factors that go into the decisions that you're going to make. But why do you think it's important to do an entire episode on something like this?
There's a lot to tackle. It's not just as easy as going in and doing gates or going in and doing this or that, because, I mean, if the gates are out, then, well, that's a great opportunity to look at slats. And if that's out, then that's a great opportunity. You know, it just keeps snowballing, and it can be very overwhelming because of it takes a lot of skill.
Yep.
Not something that you do on the farm every day, and it's expensive.
Right.
Materials are expensive. Labor's hard to find. And you know what? Pig barns are meant to have pigs in them, and the people that own the pigs, they don't like to not have pigs in your barn. So it's got to be done in a timely fashion too.
So there's probably going to be things that we pull out of our conversation today that applies outside of the hog industry that will translate. But also, if you're looking at getting into the industry and potentially looking at an older barn because of lower cost to purchase,
Yep.
now we can give you some expertise here as we converse with Nick Stellern. He's the service manager at Integrity Builders and Supply. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So let's dive in a little bit deeper. Who is Nick? How'd you get to where you are?
Oh, I don't know if a hour-long segment's going to be enough.
Try it.
But no, it's so I got my start here at Integrity about 10 years ago. Started just doing low-level service stuff, fixing some easy stuff on barns, which easy stuff I usually say is like cables or patching up curtains. And I slowly worked my way up to just learning more. I got more involved in controls, the electrical side of things. And that's we snowballed it all together and started developing the service department. We grew a lot bigger over these 10 years, and we kind of do anything and everything inside of a hog barn now.
Yeah, the hog barns, it's the true testament of what a farmer is, I feel like. Because like just you said, electrical, but then you got to know from the basics down to a cable breaking, but then animal husbandry to some huge fixes that, could potentially go wrong. So it's a tough world to tackle. So let's just do another overview. Where's Integrity at, and how many employees you got, and what all do you guys handle?
So we're based out of New London, Iowa, which is southeast corner of the state. We are about 20 employees or so, full-time employees, and we bring up migrant help HOA program over the course of like the building season, I'd call it. Mm-hmm. And we take care of pretty much anything you think of on and in a hog barn. So ventilation, controls, electrical, curtains, fans, ceilings, roofs, the structure itself, concrete. I mean, pretty much anything you can think of. The only thing we don't really do is have our own rock quarry, and we don't normally deal with gas lines. We kind of leave that to the gas companies that supply the LP to barns.
So when you think about the topic we're discussing today, barn remodeling, is this something that's become more of a necessity or more popular in the last 5 to 10 years than it was 20 to 25 years ago?
100%. I think what we've seen as time has passed here, back when I started 10 years ago, barns were relatively cheap as compared to today, where you were getting, 5 to 7 year loan payoffs. Nowadays, that's not even a possibility. I mean, most of them are pushing 20, sometimes 30-year payoffs. Ooh, so It doesn't make a lot of sense to build new, whereas you can spend a fraction of that remodeling. And the majority of the barns that were built 20 to 25, even 30 years ago, they're coming up on that cusp of needing some major remodel work. And it's still a lot less expensive than building new. Were
there a lot of barns built in that time period, that 25 to 35 years ago, like Corey's age of barns?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. There was I think it was in the late 90s, there was a bunch that were put up, in early 2000s, which doesn't seem like it's that far away, but it's been 22 years. So I know in this area, just like southeast Iowa where we're at, you can't go much more than a couple miles without seeing a hog barn. And they've been there long before we started putting buildings together. So, I mean, most of them are pushing 20 plus easily.
Yeah, like you said, the payoff on these barns, it doesn't cash flow anymore like it once did. You have to really lean on the value of the manure, which is very valuable right now.
Right.
But won't always be like that, or shouldn't always be like that. So if you don't want to lean on that too hard to have to make these barns work, it's just kind of, it blows my mind. And that's why we're looking at a remodel, because otherwise I would love to just tear the dang things down and put new up.
Put brand new up, right.
Because the environment in there, there's a lot of salt in the feed and manure on stuff. It's just an environment that isn't inviting for longevity of steel and electronics. Yep. And pigs get to be 300 pounds and they wear concrete out and steel out, and it's crazy. So we need to look at remodeling, because it is truly an asset to the farm and not just cash flow, but also the manure.
You know, I was listening to Corey, and I was also thinking about how you guys should have your own TV show. Something like a Windy City Rehab or a Chip and Joanna Gaines, but you're doing it to hog barns. I think maybe the listeners
Love it or list it.
Yeah.
Are you going to remodel this or put a new one up, or just be the smart person and get out of livestock altogether?
Yes. I think we could
It
totally
would be entertaining.
So, but if we think of the TV show, just to kind of keep running with that, you know, a couple of those shows, they've got people that they show them around to 3 or 4 different houses, and then they pick the characteristics that they have the most promise or the most value. So if we've got at least 2 listeners that have written in that said they just don't know what to look for because there's some older style barns that are in their area. If you're driving around the countryside, what are some good things to look for that might be buildings worth rehabbing?
So I would say, you know, as far as a building goes, there's 3 major things. What we would consider major things. It's concrete, the structure, and then basically the interior equipment. So, I mean, the biggest thing I think as far as not spending a whole lot, but getting the bang for your buck, making sure the concrete and the foundation is in good shape. You know, there is a lot of money tied up in concrete and the foundations for those and the slats that were put on them. If you've got a building that's rock solid as far as concrete goes, you're about a third of the way into having a good barn. And then the next thing we look for is the structure. So you said it, over time, it's not a very friendly environment inside these barns with the gases and the feed and just the quality of the water is a problem too, because most of these are well water and it's not usually good treated well water. You see a lot of rust and metal just corroding. So if you think about how the buildings are built, as far as the wooden construction, they're nailed and screwed and metal is holding them together, and the steel on the roof, that stuff starts to degrade, you know, 20, 25, 30 years down the line. That is another kind of pain point to look at on these barns. So I would say, you know, check concrete, check foundation, check the structure. The insides can be remodeled very easily as far as equipment goes, because that changes almost every year as far as specs go on buildings. They change what they want inside the barns. So that's not usually a huge deal. Your biggest costs are, again, concrete and the building.
Yep. I mean, so much of this is specialized. I've been in a hog barn almost every day for the last 10 years of my life. I still don't know if I could go to someone else's hog barn, not knowing it, because there's so many different kinds or different setups, and be able to tell you if it's good or not. Do you guys offer like a service that you could come and look at a barn if we're interested in buying, or just one that we own?
Yeah, we sure basically operate on the free estimate mantra. We like to come out and take a look at everything you've got there on site at the barn, make recommendations as far as what we see you probably need to be working on. And we also offer every turn. So at the end of every animal turn or herd age, we offer a tune-up of sorts where we come in and look at all of what we call the pain points in barns and make a list on how bad things are getting or how good a shape things are still in.
So it's kind of like running your tractor or the combine through the special at the local dealer at the end of the season.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yep.
So I want to go back to your number one item to look at is the quality of the concrete, condition of the concrete. So a lot of the barns, for our listeners that maybe aren't familiar listening, is that we're talking about is there's a 6 or 8 foot, sometimes rarely 10 foot pit beneath a slatted floor.
On some.
Yep.
And for probably a majority of those that carry the most value today, that's the style, or they're flushed into a lagoon.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, how do we know that the concrete's good in the pits? I mean, we have to be pumped empty, or is there something we can look at?
Concrete on the inside would be one, to pump it down, kind of look down in there and see what we got. You can't usually pump all the way down to the floor. It's pretty difficult, but you can still see the exterior walls from the inside. And you can see if there's cracks, you can see them usually. And then the other thing would be slats and beams. So in the pit are columns, and in different barns they were made out of different things. But most of the time it's a solid concrete column, and on top of the column sits a beam, and on top of the beam sits the slats. Well, those you can look at very easily from above. You might need a flashlight or something to look, but you can start seeing concrete wearing out very quickly on beams and the undersides of slats, well before you see any major damage, if you're looking for it. And it's kind of an art, I would say. I mean, there are some specialized companies out there that come and look at slats, that just fully do slat replacements only. And they've got cameras and whatnot to stick down in there and take a look at the bottoms of the slats, because a lot of the time slats wear out from the bottom up, because that's where the manure and the gases and all that stuff is sitting. And it'll start eating at the concrete, and if it chips it away, it gets to the rebar, and then the rebar rusts, and then you've got failure in the concrete.
So, Corey, when you're looking at your family's barns and putting the remodel together, are you going to have to follow certain specs because of the pigs that you have in there as you do the remodel, or can you go about any design you want to do?
I would say typically if you're like with what I would call an integrator, which is one of the larger pig owners, they would have certain specs, basically pertaining to what feeders you have, what size of pens you have, what kind of, style of waters, and what controller you have in the barn. The people that I am specifically feeding for really aren't that, worried about it. But that being said, I want my barn marketable. That, they might not be the ones that want to put pigs in my barn in 3 years. So if that happens, I want to be marketable. So I think there's some industry standards to, how many waters per pig, how many pigs per water, and how many per feed hole and all that. So whether you want the capability to pre-sort before your loads. So there's a lot of stuff you have to be thinking about, and that's in itself is overwhelming. And I think that's why you need someone on your team like Integrity that can come in there and help, because they work with all the integrators.
So is that something that is available? And I know there's other companies like Integrity, but that's something our listeners can go to you for to get some perspective. If this is the first hog barn they're buying, they may not know what direction to go.
Yeah. No, that's definitely something we can lean into as far as what integrator you're working with. And even if you don't have a set integrator and you're allowed to make your own decisions, just based on kind of the current trends and what we're installing in barns, we can kind of give you the options you would need and show you the pros and cons of those different options. But if it is an integrator building, the spec sheets we usually have to follow fairly closely. There are some variations in some of the specs as far as certain sizes of buildings. You can do certain different like penning layouts and different feeder combinations. But for the most part, everything's been going to wet dry feeders, and the fast pen gating is kind of a nice option. For guys, it just helps to pre-sort before you have to load out. But most of the time, as far as specs, every integrator has their own variation of specs, essentially. There are some common denominators between them, but for the most part, they all kind of do something a little different.
What would be some of the barns, like if you could say, what is the barns that you are building the most or remodeling the most right now? Is it feeder to finish, wean to finish? Is it a certain style?
Yeah, wean to finish is probably the majority of the barns that we remodel and work on. We do build feed to finishes. There's not a whole lot of them like in this area specifically that we work on, but they're the only real difference between those two barns would be the addition of supplemental heat for the weaner pigs, which would be either brooders or tube heat or heat lamps. And then the different kinds of feeders and waters usually kind of coincide with other. I would say, for the most part, those barns that were built, 20, 25 years ago, a lot of them were weaned to finish, with old heat lamps. And the current trend with heat lamps is nobody really uses those anymore. They've went to brooders or tube heat. So there's a lot of updates when it comes to the wean to finish side of things, more so than the feed to finish side of things, I would say.
Have you guys figured out the tube heat yet? Because I hate my brooders.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We've installed quite a few of them, and we actually really like them. They're fairly low maintenance. We haven't had too many issues with them. They make the ones they put in hog barns are a little more heavy duty than like ones you would put in, say, a shop.
Yep.
And they're sealed really well, but they work great. I've installed personally myself. I've installed several of them in barns before, and it's really easy to do, and they're really easy to operate. And they work. I mean, they're really good. They're just they are a very more expensive option for sure.
Well, I can tell you the time is money, and the time that I have in changing orifices and parts on each individual brooder heater in the barn between turns. Yeah, it's like banging my head against the wall.
Well, that's something else to think about is the technology has probably come a long ways in the time period from when these barns were built to now we're remodeling. What are some of the newest technologies that you're putting into barns now?
Some of the big ones, so wet dry feeders. A lot of the barns around here were built with just dry feeders with, say, cup waters or nipple waters. And now the big push is wet dry feeders, which is essentially the feeder and the water all in one. That's a big one. Usually when barns are up for like contract renewal, feeders is a big one, and then controls. So in the past, most of the barns around here were put with pretty basic controls. They work. There's nothing really, wrong with inherently how they work. But the biggest thing they've pushed for was more updated, more modernized, more robust controllers that last a little longer. The hardware and stuff inside of them is built better. It's a little stronger. And then the next step above that would be smart controllers, which there's several different brands that you can buy, but essentially the basis is you can hook them up to the internet and you can log on to them from your smartphone or tablet or computer, and you can actually see how the barn is operating remotely. That's a pretty big push as far as remote control of a barn or remote monitoring. So that way if you have a big site, you got a lot of barns, you don't have to go to every single one of them to look at what's going on. You can just sign in and look at them all on one screen.
Yeah, I know the field advisors really like that kind of stuff too, and guys with multiple sites and stuff. And it is crazy, the technology. I feel like livestock is finally starting to get into some of this higher tech stuff. For a while, I felt like it lagged when I first got in about 12 years ago. But all the naysayers that, oh, I can't believe you put all these pigs in this barn on that concrete and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, you don't realize there's like a $12,000 worth of a controller in here that has sensors all the way down the barn, and we're pulling fresh air in that's optimal for these pigs. They always have feed and water. On a 95-degree day, I can walk in there and they're getting misted 3 minutes every 30 minutes because they don't sweat, and it's 10 degrees cooler in there. Right. I mean, and there could be a bunch of pigs in one pen, and they have all the space they want, but then they go pile on each other because they like to do that. So the technology to take care of these animals, I mean, we wouldn't do it if it wasn't the best thing.
Right, and I don't think our listeners are the group that we have to convince that this is the right way to go. But it is fascinating when you see the Snapchats, the Twitter posts of it being 10 degrees below zero out, and then they step into their hog barn and it's 72.
Yep.
The animals are in such great care, but I could see, like we were getting into, is if you have a field advisor or you have employees that are going to be maintaining these sites, having the technology and those controls is valuable because, not that you don't trust your employee, or not that your field guy doesn't trust you. Well, he probably doesn't trust you. But you have that ability to make sure that we don't have a catastrophic issue.
Well, it's redundancy. It's like the same thing of flying a plane or whatever. The more eyes and the more fail-safes you have, your field advisor or maybe your employee or you might catch, hey, the water consumption's down on this barn. What's going on? Or on
Water
the worst.
consumption's
Water
up.
consumption's way up by 5 times. Oh yeah, a line broke right after they did chores the day before.
Right.
So it's crazy what we can catch with the new technology.
Well, before we get too much further, Nick, I know our listeners are probably wondering what kind of money are we looking at? So, I mean, obviously we're not going to know how much a site's going to cost because that'll depend upon where they're at, how many acres comes with it, how big the barns are. Do you have like an estimate on a per pig or per pig space basis as to what it costs to do slats, what it costs to do feeders, to kind of give us an idea?
Sure. So yeah, it would be fully dependent on, what kind we're talking about, but we've priced and have, very recently done pricing that ranges anywhere from $100 a pig space to $200 or $300 a pig space, depending on how much remodeling and brands. There are certain brands that offer a little better quality, a little better warranty. Of course, they're more expensive. But that usually covers quite a wide swath of different kinds of remodels, anywhere from that $100 to $300 per pig space range. That covers quite a bit of remodeling for the most part. If there's some specialized stuff or really, really off the wall stuff, the pricing changes, of course. But for a start, you can kind of go off those numbers. It gets you relatively close.
When I got in 2013 to growing pigs, I think $300 a pig space was what it cost to build a new barn.
Correct. Yep.
Right.
I remember using some of those numbers in cash flows.
Yeah, that was a pretty close close number. Is it $400 now to build a new barn? Is it more than that?
Well, so it depends, obviously, of course, what kind of integrator you're talking about, and it depends on the site layout. But all in, brand new site, brand new building. I mean, anywhere from $850,000 to $1 million sometimes,
For
depending on
24.
The price is pretty variable on new sites specifically, just because the amount of rock they need, and I mean, you're digging new services for everything. So it's usually a little cheaper to put a building on an existing site, but it's not much. I mean, the barns have went up 30 to 40%, I'd say, pretty easily.
Well, that right there is already something I hadn't thought about, is the new driveway, all the rock that goes around of it, all the services for brand new, the dirt work. You may have to dig a new well.
Probably have to dig a new well.
Yeah, not going to come off.
And if you go rural water, we had rural water on our pigs for a long time, and it was like $1,500 a month.
Oof.
How much we were drinking in the summer and misting and all that. So that paid for a new well pretty quick.
So
Yep.
when you've been working with your clients, what is something that usually gets overlooked? If we're going through a barn and we're taking a look, you already talked about concrete, we talked about the feeders, we talked about the structure, but what's something, maybe it's small, I don't know what it is. What usually gets overlooked?
So two things. I would say ceilings. So there was quite a different array of materials used on ceilings. There was something called tri-ply, which is just kind of like a plastic kind of sheeting that's held up with batten strips. And there's been aluminum, steel, plastic. A lot of the times, one of the biggest overlooked things is on the ceiling. It can affect quite a bit. You don't really think about it, but if your ceiling's old or if it's starting to rot away, all of that is just air leaks. So in minimum ventilation, like the lowest amount of ventilation you need to move air and have enough air for the pigs, it throws all that out the window if you've got giant holes in the ceiling or if it's leaking really bad from the attic down. That's a big one. We do a lot of ceiling repairs and have in the past quite a few ceiling repairs. And along with ceiling repairs, then the biggest thing is on these older barns, the PVC on the ceiling. So you've got conduit, you've got water, all that stuff gets very brittle over time. And when you're changing ceilings out, the likelihood of that stuff breaking is fairly high.
Yeah.
So trying to think about, if I'm doing ceiling repairs, it's a good idea to talk about replacing water lines and conduit and everything too.
Yeah, because I imagine you got all the labor there tearing everything down. That's probably a big part of the cost. Is just getting everything down. You might as well go back up with new.
So
Yep, exactly. Because the relative cost of materials on that end of things, it's plastic. So yeah, plastic prices are all over the place. They go up, they go down, but the amount of plastic that you're putting in there, as far as runs of water lines or runs of conduit, is nowhere near as expensive as the labor it is to put that kind of stuff up.
Yeah.
So then you've got a lot of producers that have built barns and ones that have done remodels. What is something that they've put in, like a creature comfort or something along those lines, that they feel like they couldn't live without? They call you up and they go, "Oh my God, that was such a great idea."
One of those things like a power tarp on a semi. It's like,
Right.
How did I get along without that?
Right.
Yep. As far as ease of using the building, fast pens, fast alleys. Everybody we've installed that in for, they love it.
Okay,
They
so
never
what
want
is
to go
that?
back.
I don't know if I'm following. What is a fast pen or a fast alley?
So usually, just for example, say in a building, you walk down the center of the building, you've got pigs on the left, pigs on the right, and pens.
Yeah.
What the fast penning does is set a section just outside of that alleyway where all the gates can swing back and forth, and you can put pigs in those gates, and it's like one big open pen, essentially. If you're wanting to run pigs out of it, you can open all those gates up, and every pig that was in that little front section, clear path straight to the door.
Yeah. So basically, you normally had like a 32 or 36 inch alley that was just wide enough for 1 or 1.5 pigs to go down.
Yep.
And now it's like a 10-foot, or how big is that?
Yeah.
Like a 10
8
foot.
to 10 foot usually.
Gives you the ability to, you know what, hey, we're pretty busy. We can go in and sort these 10 pigs out of the pen 2 days before the load,
Yep.
put them in that pen, and then you just open those gates, and those pigs aren't getting turned around and coming back and fighting you, because that 32, 36 inch alley, once that pig gets turned around, for some reason they can turn around back at you, but they can't turn back around to go out on the truck.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
So I would say, and I don't have it, but I think a big creature comfort for me would be a permanent chute.
Yeah.
I have a 3-barn setup, and we have a chute that's portable that we move. Fine and dandy in the summer when it's nice. In the wintertime, when the wind's blowing, it starts snowing, it's 3 a.m, not fun, especially when it's icy.
And we have done a lot of permanent load chutes the last few years, because that time frame of buildings being built here, permanent load chutes wasn't really a standard. They did a lot of portable chutes because they were moving them from barn to barn to barn. Anymore now, yeah, the permanent load chutes, it's nice, especially in the winter.
Yeah.
And the pigs seem to operate a little better. If it's sealed up good, they're not getting that cold wind hitting them in the face, or the sun's not beating down on them. It's just the standard white LED light. It's all the same as what's in the building. They're used to it. They move a lot easier.
Sounds nice.
So,
We can do that for you.
right.
Oh, I've got it quoted. They aren't cheap.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So our listeners are pretty ambitious people. I mean, that's the reason they listen to the Farm for Profit podcast. They're always trying to do things better, more efficiently, and they may think they want to tackle a job like this themselves. What are the benefits of using a company like Integrity to go through a process like this?
Well, for the most part, we figure everything out for you. We have access to all the top major brands very easily. So a lot of the hog barn agriculture kind of stuff around equipment that goes in these barns, you got to be a dealer to get the equipment. You could still buy, and we are a parts warehouse as well. You can buy stuff from us directly, as you can a lot of other places. But not having to worry about if you bought enough or if you figured it correctly, we take care of all that for you.
So how far do you guys go to work? You said you're out of New London, Iowa. How far have you traveled? How many of our listeners can you help?
So I'd say standard. We have gone up to 3 to 4 hours away from there. We've gone farther. We've built some sow units that are quite a bit distance away from there. But as far as regular finishers or nurseries or if you need service or something like that, we'll pretty much travel 3 to 4 hours away from New London.
Okay.
That's a pretty standard, radius for us, I'd say.
And are there companies?
Once we get past that, unfortunately, it gets very cost prohibitive. Our costs just get too high, and nobody usually wants to pay for that as much, just because it gets expensive, especially now with fuel prices the way they are. Unfortunately, things have just gone up.
So are there companies?
And once you get past that radius, there's usually other companies that are just as close as well.
Good. You answered the question I was stuttering to answer twice.
Well, I imagine.
Oh, sorry.
I imagine, some of these bigger projects, it's not like you're going up there for a day. You probably almost got to go up there at the beginning of the week and stay in a hotel or, and then you got a lot of H2A workers. There's just a lot of bodies you got to house there for a while.
Yep.
Well, Corey,
there's usually quite a bit of expense as far as getting the crews aligned. How many people do we need? And then how long do we keep them out there? Because we like to land at a site, finish a job. We don't usually like to leave if we can help it. We want to finish it. It just makes everybody happier. The customer ends up with a better product because you got guys there already working. We don't have to leave and come back. It usually just works better that way.
Do you get the same H2A workers back every year?
For the most part, yeah. For the past 6 to 7 years, I think. I can't remember exactly how long we've been getting them, but I would say the majority of the guys we get, it's the same guys.
Okay.
Some guys don't want to come back, or they get different jobs, or they go to other, companies or something, and sometimes we add more guys. When we first started bringing them up, we didn't bring up near as many guys as we do now. Mm-hmm. So, of course, we've added some guys, and some guys have left to do other things, or some guys want to stay home. But like I'd say 90% of the guys, it's the same guys we started with.
That's good, because I imagine that's something that you wouldn't want different people every year. You'd have to retrain them. You'd probably spend half the summer retraining them.
Yep.
Well, I've got only one more question on my want to ask list about prepping for winter. Do you have any other curious? Your family's going into this. Is there anything else that you want to grab out of a conversation like this?
I think we've hit most of it. Besides getting the integrators to raise pig rents, I don't, it's crazy. It's the same. It's the same money for pigs that it was 12, 13 years ago. And everything else has moved up. So I don't know what we got to do there.
Right. Well, this show comes out at the end of November, Nick, and that's really close to, if not already, pretty much winter here in Iowa, and of course a lot of our fellow listeners. If we already own a barn, what are some things that we can do to prep for winter so we don't have any accidents or actually have to call you to come fix something?
Okay, yeah. So big one, check your heaters. Make sure the heaters are working well before it gets that cold, because it's like anything. It's going to fail at the worst possible moment. So if you're a step ahead, fixing heaters, making sure they actually work, that's huge. And then I'd say this next thing, almost equal to that, if your barn has curtains, fixing those up, patching holes, or putting plastic up, or putting bubble wrap. It's kind of like a reflective material in there to help keep some of the heat in. Just anything you can do to help kind of button up, weak parts of the building, as far as like doorways, putting seals on, curtains, fixing the holes, the gaps, and then heaters. Yeah, those are always the big ones. We work on those all through the winter usually.
I hate bubble wrap, but it is a necessity. But I would solid side a barn just so I wouldn't have to do that. Are you guys putting solid sides on barns quite a bit now?
Yeah, lot of them. There's a certain integrators, that's basically their standard anymore. Solid side walls, tunnel curtains at the front of the building, just strictly tunnel building. And it's an interesting setup. Surprisingly, the barns, they're pretty nice. They keep the temperature fairly constant in those as well. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So is that something that if Corey's got side curtains, he could convert his barn to tunnel?
You could. You sure could. You would want to make sure you get the adequate CFM per pig well within that range. We'd have to do some math on it as far as what you got for fans, what you got for curtain opening on the front. But you sure could. We've done it before. We've solid sided existing curtain sided buildings before.
Interesting.
Sometimes we've had to add fans though to help compensate for that loss of tunnel curtain on the side.
Right.
I think we've done the math and it would work because my barn's actually running natural and tunnel.
Okay.
So they do run in tunnel most of the time.
Right.
Just there's that little 70-degree temperature that we hardly ever get perfect days that it's the side curtains are down.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's good. Nick, this has been a pleasure having you on the show. We'll have you plug the Integrity contact information, website, or whichever it is. And then you have to answer our question that we ask every one of our guests. What is the best advice that you have ever been given? But you can think about that while I summarize, and then, Corey, you prepare the challenge. So today we had Nick Stellern here, service manager at Integrity Builders and Supplies. We were talking about trying to give you, as the listener, some perspective, some experience, and some tips on what it would look like to remodel an existing hog barn. We explored that the costs of a new hog barn are quite high because of the site prep costs, the extra rock, the potential well, the additional utilities that need dug in. And maybe there's a more economical, a more profitable way to raise hogs, and that is to rebuild or remodel a hog site. We're not starting a brand new TV channel or show like Chip and Joanna Gaines. Maybe we will. I don't know. Nick seems to be up for the idea. But if you're going to go look at a site that you don't already own, or you're going to go out and take a look at the one that you do, look at the concrete, look at your structure, and look at the equipment. You can do a lot of that with a visual inspection. Make sure if you do see some issues with your slats that you do some further investigation from the bottom up, because they tend to wear out from the bottom side of things. If you're starting to put a plan together as to what should I upgrade, things to continue to monitor is what kind of ceilings you have. Maybe we're looking at fast pens or fast alleys. We're looking at upgrading to wet-dry feeders, making sure we have the proper controls, maybe even a smart controller in the setup. But all these things could potentially run us anywhere in the neighborhood of $100 to $300 per pig space, depending upon the quality of the equipment, the amount of the work, and the package that your integrator is going to require. That's the other thing to keep in mind is not all integrators are the same. So if you want to have a more marketable structure, make sure you are doing what is in the best interest of the future of your farm. And then as we get into preparing for winter, take a look at all things that can help keep you more efficient. Take care of those curtains, make sure everything is in place, monitor your heaters. If you need to have any of that fixed before times get bad, now is the time to look at that. Corey?
My challenge would be if you are in hog barns or other barns, which is another question I'm going to ask you. I found one if you guys do other livestock. But if you're in any of the livestock stuff, I would say add integrity builders to your advisory team. You might not need them now, but there's one thing for certain. If you're in livestock, eventually you will need them. Or need someone like them. You might not be in their area, but you need someone on your team that knows what's going on there, because you might need to make an emergency call, or you might just need to say, hey, this is an asset I want to keep going for another 20, 30 years. Guys, get in here and fix it up for me.
Right. Oh, good. I like that. Great challenge. And Nick, what is the best advice you've ever been given?
Don't be afraid to make mistakes or fail. There is a lot that can be learned from failing and making mistakes. I would say, I would almost argue that you might make your best decisions after you've messed up. You learn from that stuff very, very quickly. And if you don't, you make the mistake a second time, you should learn a little quicker, I hope.
Right. You would, yeah. It should be even more impactful. No, that was really good. I know that Integrity Builders has a great YouTube channel that you guys, you might not even be in the area to help our listener, but at least they can go and get educated on what things to potentially help them do things better. You also have kind of a fun TikTok channel to follow, but what is the best way for them to reach out to you guys if someone of our listeners has a question?
So the two best ways to reach out to us would be our website, which is integritybuildersandsupplyinc.com. And then the second best way would be just give us a phone call. Our main office number is 319-752-9001. Either one of those options will get you the quickest response.
Yep.
Awesome.
And I had one more question that I forgot to ask. So you guys do feeder to finish barns, wean to finish barns, nurseries, sow barns. So that covers pretty much all the gamut of hogs. Is there anything else that you guys build?
Sure. So we can do turkey sheds because they share similar parts. We do cattle barns. We do pole sheds. So pole barns, anything that would be, I guess I'd call like a pole barn, any pole barn construction style barn. So SIPS panel barns, so like shouses or shop homes, we can build those. I think that covers most of it as far as new builds.
Right.
Pretty cool.
I'm glad you asked the question.
Yeah. Well, what spurred me was Rachel had one of those shouses on Integrity Builders TikTok a couple months back. Beautiful, beautiful home. If I could get my wife to convince to live in one of those, I would do that.
Oh, that is awesome. Yes, Nick, thank you again. It's been a pleasure. We talked probably longer than anybody ever would have thought we could talk about hog barns, but a lot of
I think we can keep going.
Really good value.
I'm sure there's more, yeah.
Yes. Listeners, if you've got questions, send them to farm4profitllc@gmail.com. We'll get you connected to Nick. But until next time, have a good one.
Remember, if you aren't farming for profit, you won't be farming for long.